oftentimes those people that have pain bending forward, like we mentioned before in our previous talk, is because they are either bending forward very often, like workers that move boxes, for example, is just one example, right? Or teachers that, preschool teachers that move kids and need to talk down to kids like this, or people that have office desk jobs that sit often, and that causes flexion of the lumbar spine. So even if you look like you have great posture, the reason you are still in lumbar flexion is anytime the femur comes up like this is our model, okay? Anytime the femur comes up into flexion, it's connected to the pelvis, right? This big old bony object here, right? And that causes what's called posterior pelvic tilt, this action, right? And no matter what, that causes a little bit of lumbar flexion in the low back, okay? Which is this, okay? So over a period of time, something called creep sets in, which is about 30 to 40 minutes, right? And what that is just accumulated stress on your ligaments and discs in the low back. Okay? That's what we want to avoid. Quick solution, get up every 30 to 40 minutes. And we'll talk later about a little bit more in depth about micro break concepts, which is exercises or little movements that you can do every 30 to 40 minutes to encourage movement of the low back to avoid that concept of creep, right? And the same concept goes for people that bend forward often. The fact of the matter is this, no matter if you're like this or this, you'll still get a little bit of lumbar flexion. So if you're doing it very often, you run the risk of sensitivity, right? So like we talked about before, moving in the opposite direction and extension-based exercises are good to do throughout the day in that micro break fashion. And one easy one that I like is the dynamic hip flexor. I'll move back into this view a little bit, and this one super easy. Feels like it opens up the hip area, squeeze the glute, reach to the sky, avoid big arches, okay? Anything else you want to add? I know you're itching to add something.
I'm always itching
to
add stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about these two concepts that we went over, and I'm gonna use some analogies to help you guys understand it. And I want you to start thinking of it like this. So I want you to think of flexion or bending forward as a monetary value. In this scenario, you start off with a flexion bank. And your flexion bank originally starts off with positive cash flow. So let's just say there's 2 million flexion dollars in this flexion bank. And every time you bend forward or you flex, you pull something out. And here's the thing, when you have $2 million in there, you don't really notice 100,000 gone. It's still a large sum and you still have a lot of flexion available. Well, over time, we will repetitively pull out $1 to the point that we run through that $2 million flexion bank. Once that happens, now we're in a negative. We're getting overdraw charges. I want you to think of those overdraw charges as pain or discomfort. So when we start to hit that point that we're overdrawn, the more we overdraw, just like in real life, the more pain we're in.
Yep.
Because we have less money, which equates to more pain for me. So the other thing to think about is, how can I reverse that? Is there any way for me to potentially put money back in there? So like anybody else trying to save money, the one thing you want to do is avoid taking money out. Second, a lot of times extension or moving in the opposite direction can be utilized as a form of creating a deposit or equalizing it out. So here's how this would work. Let's say you go to your bank and you pull out a flexion dollar and you are now negative on your account. You do feel that pain, but what you can do is go into an exercise, for example, this exercise or a prone press up or a standing press up, and your pain gets relieved. So you just neutraled out your balance.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to put it. Very easy to understand. Over time, you don't want to be in the negative. That negative looks red on your account, right? Just like it looks red on your body. Okay. Now, we want to shift gears and talk a little bit more about pain with extension and what that means. So the next thing we're going to talk about in our next video and our next blog is what it means to have pain leaning back and a little bit more details on that concept.